Hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our webinar today. We've got a poll going. If you don't mind letting us know, what is the current state of carbon and greenhouse gases in your company? So before we get started, let's take a quick look at these results. So we asked, does your company currently track carbon and or greenhouse gases? The majority on the people on the call, 2/3 are saying no, and we've got more in I don't know. I don't find that particularly surprising. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And does your company currently have a carbon or greenhouse gas reduction strategy? We've got almost 1/3 of people saying no, but we'd like one. So this is excellent news. I think we're going to help. This conversation today will going to help. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining. My name is Melissa Bauer and I am the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Sustainability Programs at the Pet Sustainability Coalition. Just a quick couple of level setting things before we get started. First of all, everyone's microphones and video are turned off for the remainder of this webinar. However, you have that Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'm going to encourage you, as soon as something occurs to you, if you've got a question for the PSC team or one of our speakers, please feel to drop that at any time, and we're going to get to as many of those questions as you can. You also have a chat feature. If you're having any technical issues at all, we have the Pet Sustainability Coalition team monitoring that chat. They'll be able to help you. And I also encourage you to use that chat to introduce yourself and let us know where you're calling in from today. Everyone on the call today and everyone who registered for the call today will be getting a copy of the slides and the recording from our call today. So no need to be frantically taking screenshots or anything like that. A brief introduction. If you aren't familiar with the Pet Sustainability Coalition, we are a nonprofit industry association consisting of over 200 different companies all throughout the pet supply chain. So everyone from suppliers to manufacturers, distributors, co-packers, brands, retailers, and the like. We're also a global organization. We have about 60% of our membership in North America, another 30% in Europe and the EU, and we're actually growing really fast in Asia, Australia, and South America as well, which is very exciting. And we serve a dual role. So we work with each of our 200 plus member companies to help them measure, improve, and celebrate their sustainability performance for whatever that means for their individual company's goals and culture. But we also work to address large-scale environmental issues too large for a single company to solve. And our topic today really kind of bridges both of these missions. I can say confidently on behalf of the entire Pet Sustainability Coalition team that carbon footprinting, whether it's of products or packaging or shipping, is by far the fastest growing topic that we are getting at the Pet Sustainability Coalition. The amount of momentum that this topic is really accelerating, honestly, just in the last 6 months is astounding. And with the growing effects of climate change, whether that's wildfires or floods or rising temperatures, I think that this is a topic that's really gaining traction very, very quickly, which is great news. So we can help you with this journey and talking about that journey and why and the how and all of those things. I am thrilled to introduce you to 3 speakers that we're going to be hearing from today. So I'm going to be reading some bios because honestly, these bios are entirely too impressive to miss. So from WSP, and if you're not familiar with WSP, WSP is one of the largest environmental sustainability, but also broader consulting firms in the world and are very, very involved and experts in this space. So WSP actually helped write the greenhouse gas reporting protocol, which really rules this entire conversation. And from WSP today, we have Colin and Sam. So listen to these bios, y'all. So Colin leads WSP's decarbonization practice and is experienced project manager in the climate ESG sector. For those of us who don't know what ESG is, that stands for environmental, social, and governance, and is a kind of another way of phrasing sustainability sustainability programs. Colin's focus areas include climate change strategy, greenhouse gas accounting and verification, science-based targets, life cycle assessments, and climate risk assessments and disclosures, as well as ESG strategy and metric development. Colin holds an MASc in solar economics and a PhD in wastewater treatment computational fluid dynamics. So today's trivia is anyone who knows what a PhD in wastewater treatment computational fluid dynamics is. We're also going to be hearing from Sam Metaxas. Sam is an internationally experienced consultant in the ESG sector with a focus on carbon management and infrastructure and the built environment, greenhouse gas accounting, life cycle assessment, and climate change strategy development. Sam holds an MSc in carbon management from the University of Edinburgh. And then after we hear from WSP, I am so excited to introduce a woman from a company that honestly needs no introduction. But Jack Prehogan is the CBO and co-founder of Open Farm, a premium and ethically sourced pet food brand committed to raising the bar on the way we feed our pets. In her role at Open Farm, Jack is focused on guiding strategic brand direction and execution, enhancing the business's culture, and championing the brand's mission and core values. Jack is also the founder and CEO of Canada Pooch, a leading pet apparel and accessories company. Jack also holds a Bachelor of Commerce from Queen's University and has earned her Chartered Accountant and Certified Public Accountant credentials. So about a year ago, Open Farm came to PSC and was really a leader in this space, looking for help on how to really start a really robust carbon accounting and footprinting program. And PSC, we were so excited to partner and help them with WSP. So I'm so excited to introduce all of our speakers, and we're going to hear from Colin and Sam first. So Colin and Sam, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome. How are you guys doing this morning?
Great, thank you. Very happy to be here.
Great, thanks.
All right, I will share my screen. Great. Thanks for the warm introduction. I won't quiz you on what my PhD is about, but thanks for having us. Appreciate it, Pet Sustainability Coalition, and happy to be presenting alongside Open Farm and looking forward to that presentation as well. Ours will be, Sam and I will focus kind of broader on the GHG accounting side, so maybe a bit less exciting than what Open Farm is doing, but please feel free to jump in, ask a question anytime. In terms of WSP, I mean, we did have a brief introduction there. We're about 50,000 employees globally, 550 offices in 40 countries around the world. We are an environmental consulting firm. We like to say we are the largest environmental consulting firm in the world. We have an entire spectrum of climate change services, design, engineering, architecture, strategy, decarbonization, anything kind of under the sun that we can do. We had a recent acquisition, Golder, which is an environmental services firm as well, which supports our growth and will support our growth over the coming years. In terms of our own sustainability performance, for the last 2 years, we've received an A- on our CDP, our Carbon Disclosure Project questionnaire. We've been named the most sustainable company in engineering from the World Finance magazine for the last 3 years, including most recently in 2021. We have our own GHG targets that have been approved by the SBTi. We were the first professional services firm to actually sign a sustainability linked loan in the Americas. So part of our credit facilities are tied to how well we do in terms of our sustainability performance. And we also report for the first year this sustainability report, our climate change disclosures are in line with the TCFD recommendations, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which guides and recommends how to disclose on your own climate risks. In terms of what Sam and I do and where we work, we are part of WSP Canada's Climate Change, Resilience and Sustainability team. We sit within a smaller team, which is called the ESG team, but we work with a broader group across Canada, and we are the largest climate change focused team in Canada. We have climate advisors like myself and Sam who work on climate change strategy to fit into a broader organizational strategy. We have decarbonization experts, both strategic and technical, who understands GHG emissions. We focus on GHG target setting, mitigation approaches, and also life cycle assessment and carbon footprinting, which we'll get into a bit later. We have a whole team of climate scientists who support us on climate risk assessments, climate data manipulation to support broader climate risk understanding, and then management consultants who can support kind of translating that into either disclosures for regulatory or voluntary stakeholders, or just understanding how the broader picture of, say, GHG emissions or decarbonization fits into your strategy. Some of our clients, and this is definitely not exhaustive, but food and beverage, obviously we're here today. Financial institutions, so one of our clients is the second biggest bank in Canada, mining and industry, and then real estate and buildings, but it does not stop there. I guess we can start here because I think this is an important one of why are we here today? Why do we care about measuring greenhouse gas emissions? It was an interesting question before that Melissa posted of who has actually started to who's actually started to quantify their emissions, and I think it was 18%. So 7 people said yes. And I'll come back to that because I noticed something very interesting on that, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the objective here behind measuring these greenhouse gas emissions is allow us to understand our impact with respect to the environment. You see here the Paris Agreement being named, and so the Paris Agreement set a goal to limit average warming to 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees by 2100, with an aim to get to 1.5 degrees. A bit of language manipulation there, and this is because of the way that the governments of the countries that signed the Paris Agreement came to an agreement. But the aim is to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Just as a check, we're about 1 degree right now since pre-industrial levels, so hence the urgency to move quickly. And so accounting for your GHG emissions, quantifying them is actually the first step towards achieving those goals. So you can see on the bottom there, just the progression of actually working with your greenhouse gas emissions. Measuring them is first, setting greenhouse gas reduction targets is second, and then ongoing monitoring is third. The first question that Melissa asked was how many people are measuring their greenhouse gas emissions. 18% or 7 people said yes. And the second one is setting GHG reduction targets or actually implementing reductions, and actually 33% of you said yes. So some of you have a plan to reduce your emissions, but you have not yet quantified your emissions. And so just a flag that is often goes against what we think of measuring before you act, or trying to understand what you have before you actually start implementing. And you'll see here as we go through the GHG accounting process that typically it's trying to understand what you have first and then moving towards mitigation. I throw up science-based targets here just because it is the standard target setting approach that aligns with the Paris Agreement. It's a clearly defined pathway for companies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Open Farm has approved science-based targets. It's an organization that basically sets out the methodology and the approach to GHG targets and ensures companies are setting targets that will align with the Paris Agreement. They've actually since announced that they will no longer be accepting well below 2 degree targets. They will only be accepting GHG targets that align with the 1.5 degree pathway. So a lot of stuff there, just a bit of a preamble, and I'll throw it to Sam to dive in a little bit deeper.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so backtracking a little bit, some of you may already be familiar with the ins and outs of climate change, but for those of you that aren't, what do we really mean when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions? And these are gases that essentially trap heat in the atmosphere and contribute to global warming. So as sunlight hits the Earth, about half of this solar radiation is absorbed by the Earth's surface, but the other half is re-emitted. And greenhouse gases in our atmosphere act to absorb some of this radiation again and re-emit it in all directions, which will ultimately prevent it from escaping into space. And this results in further warming of the Earth's surface and lower atmosphere. And many greenhouse gases are directly emitted by human activities, which is why we're here and all talking about this today. And those are primarily associated with burning fossil fuels for things like electricity, heat, and transportation activities. And the more that we emit, the higher the concentration of these greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, which enhances this global warming effect. And as we know, concentrations of GHGs have been steadily increasing over recent years, which is the essence of the problem. Next slide, please, Colin. So there are a number of different greenhouse gases, and the GHG Protocol, which is the main standard for corporate GHG accounting and reporting, covers most of these, specifically those associated with the Kyoto Protocol, which some of you may have heard of. And the most important ones are carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, or perhaps those that would be most familiar to some of you on the call. So carbon dioxide, or CO2, accounts for about 3/4 of the warming impact of human GHGs. And this mainly comes from burning fossil fuels, as I mentioned before, but this is the burning of coal, oil, and gas, for example, as well as deforestation activities. That contributes to CO2 emissions as well. Methane, or CH4, can come from the production and transport of coal, natural gas, and oil, but also a hotspot is agricultural activities, such as raising livestock, which is of relevance to some of you on the call in particular, or the decay of organic waste. And nitrous oxide, like I mentioned, or N2O, that can similarly arise from agricultural activities, but also the treatment of wastewater. So you can get a sense of how these are playing into some of our regular activities as we operate businesses. It's also worth mentioning fluorinated gases, such as HFCs, and these are released from refrigeration equipment and air conditioners, as well as some industrial processes. So these are some of the most potent, the HFCs and fluorinated gases are some of the most potent and longest lasting greenhouse gases emitted by human activities. So they're quite important as well. And the key thing to recognize is that all of these greenhouse gases have unique properties and they contribute differently to the climate change issue. Next slide, please. So to account for these differences, greenhouse gases are measured using something called global warming potential, which is a metric that was developed to allow comparisons of the global warming impacts of these different gases. So specifically, it's a measure of how much energy will be absorbed by 1 ton of a gas over a given period of time relative to 1 ton of carbon dioxide. So from the table that you can see here, carbon dioxide has a value of 1 as it's used as the gas sort of for reference, and others show much larger values, meaning that they contribute more intensely to climate change. So for example, methane emitted today will last in our atmosphere for about a decade on average, which is much less time than carbon dioxide will. But methane also absorbs a lot more energy than carbon dioxide. So the net effect of this shorter lifetime and the higher energy absorption is reflected in that GWP value of 28 that you see in the table here. So it's a little bit technical, probably more than you need to know at this point, but the purpose of this is to reiterate that you may have heard the word carbon used quite frequently and generically in relation to climate change or carbon emissions. And more often than not, this isn't strictly referring to carbon dioxide, but rather a bundle of greenhouse gases expressed as carbon dioxide equivalent. So key takeaway is that GWPs are used to express greenhouse gases in a common unit. So this helps us to communicate impacts as well as to streamline calculations, reporting, target setting, that sort of thing. Next slide. So if we focus a little bit more on how this could apply to you directly, all of you today have unique and complex organizations, and your operations will result in the emission of greenhouse gases. So to capture these impacts, companies will produce what's called a corporate GHG inventory, which is essentially a list of emission sources from their business and the calculated amount of emissions coming from those sources or activities. So for inventory reporting, the GHG protocol, which I mentioned earlier, classifies emissions based on 3 main scopes. And these scopes are useful to understand because they can help you to get a sense of where the emission sources might be within your company operations. So scope 1 refers to direct emissions from sources that are owned and controlled by the company. For example, in the case of a pet food company, this would likely relate to the burning of natural gas at offices or production sites. It also covers fugitive emissions, and those are the fluorinated gases that I talked about. So those leak directly from refrigeration and air conditioning equipment on site. Scope 2 is a fairly straightforward one, and this covers indirect emissions from purchased utilities. So this is mainly purchased electricity for offices and operations, or purchased steam in some cases if production facilities might use that for activities. And finally, there's scope 3. And this includes virtually everything else that is occurring both upstream and downstream from your organization. So this really represents your company's value chain. And for example, in the case of a pet food producer like Open Farm that we have on the call, this could include emissions associated with, the goods that you purchase annually, like your product ingredients and your packaging, as well as how those are transported from the supplier to you or your manufacturer. But it also encompasses other traditional business activities like employee commuting and business travel, waste generated in operations, and even the eventual use and disposal of your products. So for many organizations, Scope 3 will represent the bulk of their emissions just because of how much is included within this category. And it might also be worth noting that the reason emissions are organized this way is really to avoid double counting, not only within your own organization, but more broadly, because as you can imagine, many of your indirect Scope 3 emissions are actually someone else's Scope 1 or 2. So these categories are specifically designed to be mutually exclusive. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned the GHG protocol already, but it's worth touching on in a little bit more detail. And the GHG protocol corporate accounting standard is essentially the globally accepted methodology for organizational carbon accounting. So it provides a framework for determining what organizations should be including within their emissions boundary, as well as calculation guidance and requirements for reporting. And beyond the original corporate standard, which is the document you see on the left there, that provides an overview of the full inventory process, but other guidance documents have also been released over the years to cover scope-specific methodologies in more detail, including the recommendations for data gathering, approaches to estimation, and instructions for actually conducting the calculations as well. And these resources are all publicly available and can be accessed at ghgprotocol.org, as you see on the screen there. Next slide, please. And the GHG protocol promotes a few key principles to ensure that reported inventories represent a true and fair and honest account of a company's emissions. And you may recognize some of these concepts as, I think a lot of them are largely derived from financial accounting principles. But ultimately, inventory should be relevant, which means they appropriately reflect the emissions of the reporting company and also serve the needs of the inventory users as well for decision-making, for instance. They should be consistent in their methodology year on year to allow for meaningful comparisons over time. Transparency should also be prioritized so that a clear audit trail is available for the data sources used, references, assumptions, and other information that contributed to that inventory. And ideally, they will be complete, meaning that they'll account for all relevant emission sources and activities that fall within the company's boundary, and that any exclusions, which happen occasionally, are clearly justified. That's what's most important. And finally, they should be accurate enough that quantified emissions are not materially over or under estimates of actual emissions. Again, important for reporting and decision-making, and this requires that uncertainties be reduced as much as possible along the way. So with that, I'll pass you back to Colin, who will go through a little bit more detail on the inventory process itself.
Great. Thank you, Sam. So we show here a very high-level overview of the steps required to build a GHG inventory. As based on the poll earlier, some of you have started this process and maybe some of you have not. And as Sam mentioned before, the GHG protocol is an excellent guide from this, and we don't really deviate from that here, but we'll just go through it quickly on this slide. So the first two steps there, you see two words, organizational and operational boundaries. And these are means to determine what emissions are within your own control or within your own operations, and those that are within your supply chain. So the scope 1, scope 2, and then what comes in scope 3. The organizational boundary defines how your accounting actually takes place. So there's actually two options: an equity share approach and a control approach. Equity would be based on how much of a company you actually own, maybe your subsidiaries or other companies under you. And control, there can be financial control or operational control. And this is a financial accounting term that defines how you can introduce different policies or that affect finances or operations. Won't get into a lot of detail. That is often the first step, but it's also a big barrier in deciding, what organizational boundary you have. Operational, as I said, goes into defining what's scope 1, scope 2. So what you have direct control over versus what's in the rest of your supply chain, which is everything else, and that's scope 3. The next step is selecting your reporting period and base year. So if you have not done this before, the first year would be your base year. We've had many questions for companies without an inventory who are starting this year of what do we do about COVID? COVID is not a normal year, and that is very fair. And you're not the only one with those questions. There are means to kind of estimate what has happened before, what would have happened if we were in the office, or there were normal business travel happening, or if operations were disrupted because of COVID, what would have happened if they weren't disrupted. The next step there, identify emission sources. So these are often quite typical if you have offices for your employees, if you have manufacturing facilities. These are all usually going to have some sort of electricity or fossil fuel combustion to heat and to power. And so it's not that difficult to identify the key sources, but the GHG protocol allows you to do that and then provides resources. And then it's on to the calculation. So you have to be able to collect activity data. So whether for electricity, it's from utilities, and for say natural gas or other fossil fuel combustion, it may be from invoices or also utilities. Calculating the GHG emissions, you would use an emission factor. Reporting your GHG emissions, the GHG protocol outlines what should be in there and what is optional. And then managing GHG inventory quality over time. So the first go at an inventory may be quite, there might be a lot of estimations required. And so that's absolutely okay. And it's within the GHG protocol rules. But there are means then for the next year to identify areas where you can improve data quality, where you can get better activity data from your suppliers, things like that, which can help you improve your inventory over time, but doesn't really affect your base year significantly. So again, very high level. This is taken from the GHG protocol, but it is the approach we use with clients to build the GHG inventory. I'll touch quickly on the science-based targets. I know I mentioned them earlier as kind of the preeminent means to set GHG targets in line with what's required by the Paris Agreement. These targets have typically a base year and a target year. I mentioned base year earlier, which is kind of the typical year of operation by which you'll compare all future years and by which against you'll measure your GHG reductions. The target year is the year you want to be, at your target. For the SBTI rules, they say a base year must not be 5 years later than the prior year. And so say if 2020 was your base year, you can't, was today or 2021, you can't set a base year for 2010. That would be 10 years prior to today. Confusing there. And then target year no later than 15 years. So I can't really set a target year for 2040 if my base year was 2020. The reason they do that is to enforce action kind of upfront. So you don't have 30 or 40 years to actually take action. You're doing it upfront, which is actually what's required of the Paris Agreement and the pathways to limit warming to 1.5. There are different calculation approaches. So you could do an absolute reduction approach, which is quite easy to understand. SBTI requires a linear reduction according to different pathways. For the 1.5 degree pathway, you should achieve a 4.2% linear reduction per year. So over 10 years, that would be a 42% reduction in your greenhouse gas emissions. It's a fairly straightforward way of doing it. Then there are also other sector-specific pathways. There are those for the building industry, for the oil and gas industry, and they're based on the individual sector pathways for 1.5 degrees set out by the IPCC. They don't apply to every sector, so oftentimes the absolute reduction approach is taken. SBTI outlines what should be in your target. So 95% of your scope 1, scope 2 should be included. At least 67% of your scope 3 should be included. And then they also permit different ambitions. So the ambition being that 1.5 degrees, that should be it for your scope 1, scope 2, but they allow a little less ambitious targets for scope 3 with the recognition that this is your supply chain, it's not your direct operations. You can't go into any of your suppliers and say, I want this done today. They may work with you on that, but certainly you don't have the ability to go influence them that much. You can see on the bottom there just two different pathways. The top is the well below pathway, and the black on the bottom is the 1.5 degree pathway based on emissions reductions. And so after you set targets, the aim is to build out those mitigation actions. So you're understanding what you can do to actually start to meet those targets. And so there's a lot of different ways of doing this. We help clients with a lot of different options here. So understanding the cost, capital and operating costs, how much GHGs will actually reduce, and what is the payback period for that? So what is the life cycle cost of carbon in that? We'll support clients on pathways to just understand, over the next 5 years, how much of this can you actually get done? And then based on what your business as usual GHG projections could be. And so if you're at X amount of emissions today and you're expecting to grow by 3 times, then your emissions may certainly be 3 times in the next 10 years. And so then how do you still meet those targets with that growth? And that's how we support our clients. The last thing I want to touch on, and I know Melissa mentioned it as well, is product-based carbon footprinting. And we're getting significant asks for this as well. And we're helping a number of food and beverage clients on this as well. And so understanding the carbon footprint or the life cycle environmental impact of different products, how the different stages contribute to that impact. And then also we're supporting a lot of clients with calculators. So if you have recipes as an organization for your pet food products, we can support you on understanding, if you have 200 SKUs, what are the carbon footprint of each of those? And then it also permits you to play around there. And so if you're trying to build a new product and you want it to be lower than some other product, you can play with the recipes and the processes to actually understand how you can get there. So I want to leave you, I know we took up a bit of time, just things to consider as you get started. So always think about why you want to do this. The business goals and objectives, this is actually the first thing it's asked in the GHG protocol. So just why you want to be there. Are you being asked by stakeholders? Is this a regulatory thing? Do you want to improve your reputation? Do you want to lead? Just kind of always bring it back to why you want to do this. Second, do you have the capacity or skill set in-house to do this? There is certainly a lot of people are growing this capability in-house, but a lot of smaller shops do hire an outside consultant to do this work. Third, estimations are going to happen and it's totally acceptable, and you will not have all the data right away. So you will not have a perfect inventory the first year. And then fourth, we just want to identify the options and the potential benefit to combining a GHG inventory with other supply chain and value chain exercises. Usually the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are quite easy to calculate. The scope 3 is quite difficult. So if there's an option to combine different things here, please do it. Key resources, GHG protocol and SBTI methodology, definitely go have a look there. That is all we have. And I will pass it back to Melissa, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Colin and Sam, thank you so much for that really overview of what seems like a complicated topic, but is a very important one. I'm so excited. Next, we're going to hear from Jack of Open Farm, who has dived, I would say, headfirst right into this journey. So Jack, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Sustainability is something that I'm very, very passionate about. So I'm just really excited that we were able to get this group together. I thought that I would use the time today to tell you about our carbon reduction journey and sort of our thought process leading up to why we dove in. It sounds like maybe there's a lot of companies and people on this call that are sort of in that consideration phase. So hopefully this will help give you guys a little bit of clarity to see another company and sort of the process that we went through. So I am going to start off by just doing a little intro to Open Farm. A bit of background, like a lot of businesses, I think we really started because we were trying to solve a problem for ourselves and our pets. I've always been a huge animal lover, but I've also been a person who really likes eating meat. And that's been, a paradox my whole life. But about 10 years ago, I had some experiences that really made me start to question where my food was coming from, and sort of sent me on this journey of discovery about factory farming and learning a lot of things about food that I really didn't want to know and couldn't unknow once I learned them. And basically caused me to become a vegetarian for many years. But my husband continued to be a meat eater. He's a barbecuer. So we kind of had to, find a new balance in our house. And really where we landed was we wanted to understand, where our meat was coming from, how it was raised, and ultimately just looking for a really high standard of sourcing and transparency in the food that we were bringing home to our family. So we're mom and dad to thrice pugs, 3 crazy pugs, and obviously they're, our kids. We want to feed them the same way. And that was ultimately the inspiration for Open Farm. And so, understanding sort of where we were coming from, you can see, Open Farm is really born with, a mission, a very strong reason for being. That's to do some good for animals and the planet. And ultimately, our goal is to provide really amazing pet nutrition, but also, give pet parents a way to live their values, but also a way that's really easy and really accessible for them. And, where they can have a positive impact in a very simple way. And the way that we do this is something that we describe as the virtuous cycle. It's a really simple concept. It's basically when, ingredients are grown and raised the right way, you'll end up with better ingredients, better food, and better nutrition for pets and people. But it's also better for everything and everyone that your supply chain touches, right? It's better for the farm animal, better for the farmer, and it's obviously better for the environment also. And we've really always believed that, consumers understand that, they know that their product choices are having an impact, positive or negative. And I think, we believe that a long time ago before it was mainstream, but I think even more so today, we really see that to be true. So the reason that I started talking about our mission is because that's really what's always motivated us to set, really big goals for how we want to drive positive impact. And there's really 3 main areas that we've always focused on. So animal welfare, sustainability, and transparency. And over the years, we've driven, a lot of innovation in those areas. I think we have had a lot of impact, but looking at our business, we really decided we wanted to take a much bigger swing at our environmental footprint. I don't need to tell you guys, because I think this is why you're here. We all know that the pet industry has such a massive impact on the environment. I thought some of these stats were really interesting to show, 30% of the carbon impact from meat comes from pets alone. And it's interesting because I think it's really not a mainstream part of, the general conversation about climate change, our industry and pets, but it's huge. I think we all know as human beings, we have this major global problem to contend with, right? And people know that, they know they need help, they want to help, but they don't know how, right? And they kind of say, well, what can I do as like one individual person? And so I think in a lot of cases, they're really looking for businesses to lead the fight against climate change. And they're really willing to support those businesses. They're willing to pay for those efforts through the products that they choose to buy. And, I think we're seeing brands in other industries just do a phenomenal job of that, of, providing those options, providing that education, and providing real value in their products. So for us at Open Farm, it was really clear that we wanted to take, serious steps to help that collective effort and to, be part of the solution. And to do that, we knew that we really had to focus on our greenhouse gas emissions. And that was really sort of the thought process and the logic that brought us to partner with WSP, who, by the way, is so fantastic. We really love working with them, and to start our carbon reduction journey, which we are in it. We are in it right now. But where did we start? So you learned some of the basic principles just now in Colin and Sam's presentation. I can tell you that the very first, before I even talk about where we started, before you even start, you realize that you don't know that much, and there's a lot to learn. And a lot of the value that working with WSP brought was education for us. I think I'm educated now, but I don't know, I wasn't when I started. A lot of these were new concepts for us, even being, a very environmentally savvy business. Carbon is its own very technical world. But the first thing that we needed to do, I think this is a great follow-on to the slides that you guys presented, because the first thing we had to do was measure. Because we had to understand our starting point. And this really is, like, I can second that, such a critical first step in that climate journey, because you have to do that to be able to set your reduction targets, to be able to track your progress. And so what we did with WSP is we went ahead and we measured all of our 2020 scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And we also committed to continuing to measure those on an annual basis, and also being really transparent with that information and publishing it publicly today and in the future, so that others can follow along outside our business and see how we're progressing, and that we're really open and honest about that as well. So after we calculated our baseline emissions, next thing was we had to set a goal. And in our mind, setting a measurable goal with a timeline was probably one of the most critical outputs of this project. And I think one of the big things that we felt is there's a lot of fluff out there. There's a lot of half targets, a lot of confusing information. You guys have probably heard the term greenwashing before. And so we really wanted to make sure that whatever goal we set was really rooted in science and actual impact. So after a lot of that education I talked about, a lot of that learning, we decided to commit to science-based targets. And like Colin said, the calculation is committing to reduce our scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions by that 42%. For us, we chose a decade, so 10 years. And that's in line with that 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Climate Agreement. At the same time, also part of our commitment was to look at our scope 3 emissions and to set aggressive reduction targets for those as well. And I think, and I'm going to show you on the next page why, but for us, definitely we recognize this as an aggressive goal, but we're really excited about it, and we're proud. We're actually only the 12th company in Canada to commit to science-based targets, which I was really surprised about. But it's something that really is just sort of now starting to pick up steam, and it's great to see that momentum, building. The more companies that do it, the better. So what's really interesting about the science-based targets is that when you commit to it, you need to reduce your emissions, like was already talked about today, from where they are today, from your baseline. So for a company like Open Farm, we're growing really fast. This is really challenging because, you can see here, this chart on the left, as we grow, of course, our sales are going to go up, our production is going to go up, our operations are going to increase. Yet at the same time, we have to reduce our emissions from today. And I think when we first understood that, we were like, what, like, how is that possible? Like that, how does that even happen? And really that is why the commitment is, it's no joke. And to make that happen just by pure logic, you are going to require major, significant organizational change. But it's something that we're really excited about. I think for us at Open Farm, like everything that we've accomplished as a business has been, setting big goals that seemed crazy, seemed impossible, but then finding really creative solutions to get there and to make them happen. So, that being said, it is a long-term goal. We also wanted to have an immediate impact. And so what we also did at the same time is we decided to employ a offset strategy. And what we did for that is we purchased verified carbon credits so that we could immediately offset our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And so that's not the end state, but it's a really good sort of interim state. So we could have that immediate impact. And it's also, as we've learned about it, the whole world of carbon credits is very, very interesting. And there's a lot of fantastic projects that are behind them. For us in particular, we were able to support some projects that have really cool, like co-benefits, like preserving biodiversity, protecting endangered species, and, just projects that as a pet company and, company of people that love animals, really sort of aligned with things that we're passionate about and start to get our team engaged in that sort of thing. So to end off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the internal component of this whole journey. As I've described, this is very much a major commitment that really requires full buy-in from, you know, your organization. Because one of the biggest parts of this journey for us, like over this 10-year period, is going to be managing organizational change, right? Because we talked about those big structural changes that are needed to make this happen. So, you know, I really believe that everyone from your CEO, your investors, your management team, to each and every employee has to be bought into this. So that's something that is a very big focus for us. And really, you know, finding different ways to do that. You know, we're doing a lot of learning and education. Like we talked about, this is complicated stuff, but our team is so eager to learn and really giving them that opportunity, you know, including the team in the ideation, the strategy, and you'd be amazed at the fantastic ideas that come from the team who are doing their jobs every day once they start really making this a part of their everyday job, thinking about what they can do to make us better and help us reduce our emissions. And then also really, you know, as a team celebrating, you know, the progress, celebrating the milestones. And then obviously it's such a cross-functional exercise. So the actual work that's going to go into it, and each and every team member is going to play a part in that. So I think for us, we're really fortunate in that the culture that we've already built really attracts people who are very passionate about sustainability and passionate about impact. That's why a lot of people come to work at Open Farm in the first place. But it's something that we have to keep working at. And so for us, you know, reinforcing sustainability within our culture is just like a very core value that we can all rally behind. It will continue to be something that's really, really important as we go through this journey together. So yeah, stay tuned. We'll definitely be providing updates as we go through these next steps. And so with that, I will pass it back to Melissa for Q&A.